June 5, 1942. Northern Crimea. Outside Sevastopol. Dawn breaks slowly over the limestone hills, and with it comes a sound no man present has ever heard before. A deep, metallic groan that vibrates through the earth long before it reaches the ears. Hauptmann Gerhard Schult, an artillery logistics officer attached to the 11th Army, feels it through his boots first. The ground trembles just once, like a restrained earthquake. Birds burst from the scrubland. Somewhere down the valley, engines idle, brakes hiss. Men shout orders into telephones hard-wired through the dirt. Then comes the final noise, not a crack, not a bang, but a cataclysmic tearing roar, as if the sky itself has been ripped open. Schult flinches despite himself. Far ahead, beyond a web of camouflage netting and anti-aircraft guns, the Schwerer Gustav fires its first shell in anger. The projectile, 7 tons of steel and explosives, nearly a meter wide, leaves the barrel at supersonic speed. You do not see it. You feel its absence. The air collapses behind it, slamming back into place with a pressure wave that rattles teeth and shatters nerves. 30 seconds later, over 40 kilometers away, Sevastopol answers with a distant, muffled detonation, the sound of concrete fortifications dying. For months, men like Schult had doubted this moment would ever come. The gun before them is absurd in scale. The barrel alone is longer than a destroyer. The carriage rests on twin parallel railway tracks, specially laid for this single purpose. Cranes, gantries, ammunition hoists, and fire control bunkers surround it like organs around a heart. More than 4,000 men are involved. Artillery crews, engineers, railway specialists, anti-aircraft units, smoke companies, military police, and guards, all to fire one shell every 30 to 45 minutes. This is not a weapon. It is a campaign. And it exists because one city refuses to fall. Sevastopol, Soviet naval fortress of the Black Sea, has already endured months of siege. Romanian and German units have battered themselves bloody against its layered defenses. Concrete bunkers buried into cliffs, coastal batteries with naval guns, underground tunnels immune to conventional artillery. Every assault has been met with disciplined fire and stubborn resistance. Generaloberst Erich von Manstein, commander of the German 11th Army, knows Sevastopol cannot be taken quickly, but it must be taken decisively. Hitler demands it. The oil fields of the Caucasus lie beyond. The Black Sea must be secured. And so Berlin offers a solution that borders on madness. The Schwerer Gustav is the brainchild of Krupp engineers, designed years earlier to solve a theoretical problem: how to destroy the Maginot Line's deepest fortifications. At 80 centimeters in caliber, it is the largest rifled gun ever built. Too large for roads, too heavy for bridges, too complex to redeploy once assembled. By 1942, France has already fallen. The Maginot Line is irrelevant. But Sevastopol remains. The gun arrives in Crimea not as a single piece, but as a convoy of trains stretching for kilometers. Assembly takes weeks. Specialized cranes lift sections that would crush ordinary rail cars. Each step is rehearsed, measured, documented. Luftwaffe fighters patrol overhead constantly. Smoke generators stand ready to obscure the sight if Soviet reconnaissance aircraft appear. Schult watches crews check elevation gears, grease recoil mechanisms, and calibrate optical rangefinders the size of naval instruments. Firing data is relayed from forward observers, using triangulation points mapped days earlier. This is artillery elevated to ritual. Nearby, General von Manstein observes through binoculars, expression unreadable. He understands the stakes. If this fails, if the gun proves ineffective, there will be no second chance. Infantry assaults alone would cost tens of thousands of lives. The first target is Fort Stalin, a massive reinforced concrete position thought to be immune to anything short of naval bombardment. Fewer, the order comes quietly. When the shell lands, Observers report something unprecedented. The round does not merely penetrate. It obliterates. Concrete slabs several meters thick collapse inward. Underground chambers cave in. Ammunition stores detonate. Survivors emerge stunned, bleeding, half-deaf, if they emerge at all. Soviet defenders, hardened by months of bombardment, are shaken in a way no shelling has achieved before. This is not artillery as they know it. This is geological violence. But for Schultz and the men around the gun, all mixes with unease. Each shot requires hours of preparation. Each shell must be transported on its own rail cradle. Each firing reveals the position despite camouflage. Soviet counter-battery fire begins to probe the hills. Stuka dive bombers scream overhead to suppress enemy guns before they can range in. The giant has spoken, and now it must survive long enough to finish what it started. June 6, 1942. Forward observation post Dorost. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Vogel presses his eye to the rangefinder, the metal still warm from the Crimean sun. Below him, Sevastopol lies half hidden by smoke and morning haze, a city carved into cliffs, tunnels, and reinforced concrete. Somewhere inside it, Soviet soldiers wait, listening. Behind Vogel, miles away but connected by wire and mathematics, the Schwerer Gustav prepares its second shot. You hear it before the command is even finished. The gun's breech slams shut with a sound like a steel vault locking. Warning klaxons wail across the firing zone. Men scatter to designated shelters, some pressing helmets tight against their ears, others simply crouching and bracing for impact. Even veterans who survived Verdun-style barrages feel their pulse spike. Fewer. The recoil alone is a spectacle. The barrel slides backward more than a meter, hydraulic buffers screaming, as they fight to absorb forces measured in thousands of tons. Dust erupts from the embankment. The twin rail tracks groan but hold. Vogel tracks the shot's calculated arc, stopwatch in hand. 38 seconds later, the earth beneath Sevastopol convulses. This shell strikes Fort Molotov, a subterranean strongpoint believed to be safe from anything short of a direct naval hit. The impact punches through layers of soil and reinforced concrete before detonating deep underground. The explosion does not blossom outward. It collapses inward, creating a crater that swallows firing positions whole. Over the radio, stunned voices report the result. Direct hit, fort destroyed, no return fire. For the first time since the siege began, entire sectors of the Soviet defensive line fall silent. But Sevastopol is not dead. It answers. Within hours, Soviet artillery begins blind counter-battery fire. Shells crash into the hills surrounding the Gustav's position, throwing up fountains of rock and earth. None are accurate. The gun's range puts it beyond most Soviet pieces, but the message is clear. The defenders understand what is happening. Above the gun site, Luftwaffe flak batteries swing skyward as Soviet reconnaissance aircraft appear, darting through cloud gaps. Fighters intercept them aggressively. Smoke units deploy thick curtains that turn the rail complex into a ghostly silhouette, barely visible from the air. On the ground, tension grows. Hauptmann Schultz watches shell handlers wrestle another massive round into position using cranes and rails. Each projectile is labeled, logged, and escorted like a head of state. Any mechanical failure, a misaligned shell, a damaged rifling band, could cripple the weapon permanently. And there will be no replacement. Manstein visits the site again that afternoon. He speaks little, but his presence carries weight. He has committed elite assault units, German pioneers, flamethrower teams, and Romanian infantry, to exploit whatever breaches the gun creates. The Schwerer Gustav is not meant to win the battle alone. It is the opening act. On the Soviet side, chaos spreads through command bunkers. General Ivan Petrov, overseeing Sevastopol's defense, receives fragmented reports. Fortresses gone silent, communication lines severed, underground galleries collapsed. His officers describe explosions unlike anything previously endured. Some believe the Germans have deployed a new bomb. Others whisper about superweapons. Petrov knows better. He understands artillery. And he understands that morale, not concrete, is now under attack. Still, the defenders fight back. Coastal batteries, including the massive 305mm naval guns, continue firing at German infantry concentrations. Snipers infest the ruins. Machine guns rake advancing pioneers. Even shattered forts yield survivors who resist from collapsed tunnels. On June 7th, Gustav fires again. And again. Each shot is deliberate. Ammunition is limited. Targets are chosen days in advance. Ammunition depots, command bunkers, artillery casemates buried so deep that conventional siege guns would need weeks to neutralize them. One shell penetrates 30 meters of earth before detonating. Another triggers a secondary explosion that burns for hours. Between firings, the gun sits silent, a colossal presence dominating the landscape. Crews eat, sleep, and wait beside it, knowing that every Soviet eye within range is searching for them. For Schultz, the novelty has worn off. The scale no longer amazes him. What unsettles him is the fragility of it all. Thousands of men, weeks of preparation, an entire logistical network, all balanced on a single machine that can only point one way. If the Soviets find it, if the rails are cut, if the gun is disabled, there is no contingency plan. By the end of the third day, German assault units begin reporting something new. The Soviet fire is weakening. Not everywhere, not all at once, but key strongpoints, the ones that anchored entire defensive sectors, are gone. Infantry advances that once stalled immediately now gain ground measured in meters, then hundreds of meters. The giant gun has not broken the city yet, but it has cracked its spine, and the final phase is approaching. June 10th, 1942. Northern approaches to Sevastopol. The air smells of chalk dust, cordite, and burning oil. Pioneers of the 22nd Infantry Division move forward in short, disciplined rushes, hugging the broken ground that once concealed Soviet gun emplacements. Where concrete walls stood days ago, there are now jagged sinkholes and collapsed roofs leading into darkness. Lieutenant Hans Keller, a combat engineer, signals his flamethrower team forward. His men pause at the lip of a crater large enough to swallow a house. From below comes no sound, no gunfire, no voices, only the slow drip of water somewhere deep underground. This is where the Schwerer Gustav has struck. Keller has fought through Poland, France, and the opening months of Barbarossa. He has never seen destruction like this. The fortification before him was not breached. It was unmade. Behind the lines, the giant gun rests between firings, its barrel angled skyward like a monument to excess. Ammunition crews work with methodical calm, though the strain is visible now. Hands are blistered. Faces are permanently gray with dust. Every shell handled feels heavier than the last, not because of its weight, but because of what it represents. On June 11th, Gustav fires one of its most consequential rounds. The target is White Cliff Battery, a coastal installation carved into solid rock overlooking the harbor. Naval observers had considered it virtually invulnerable. When the shell hits, it burrows into the cliff face and detonates inside the mountain. The explosion ruptures galleries, flips gun mounts, and seals exits with tons of stone. German observers report the battery silenced. In Sevastopol, General Petrov gathers his senior officers in a bunker whose reinforced ceiling trembles with distant impacts. Maps on the table are smudged with dirt and sweat. Entire defensive sectors are crossed out in red pencil. Petrov understands the truth before anyone says it aloud. The outer ring is failing. Soviet counterattacks continue, fierce, localized, often suicidal. Marines from the Black Sea Fleet charge German position with bayonets. Artillery crews keep firing, even as their bunkers collapse around them. Messages from Moscow demand resistance at all costs. But the geometry of the battle has shifted. German heavy artillery, including conventional 21 centimeters and 30.5 centimeter siege guns, now exploit the breaches opened by Gustav. Once hidden targets are exposed. Infantry advances are supported by direct-fire assault guns and flamethrowers, turning collapsed fortresses into death traps for those still inside. For Hauptmann Schulte, reports arrive faster than he can process them. Fort Stalin, neutralized. Fort Molotov, destroyed. Communications Node 17, silent. Coastal Battery No. 30, suppressed. The numbers are impressive. The cost is staggering. By mid-June, the Schwerer Gustav has fired fewer than 50 rounds, yet each one has reshaped the battlefield. Engineers inspect the gun constantly for stress fractures. Metal fatigue is a constant fear. Every firing risks damaging the barrel beyond repair. Soviet air attacks intensify. Bombers attempt night raids. Fighters strafe the rail lines. Flak gunners remain on edge, firing at shadows and engine noise. Smoke screens bloom repeatedly, turning day into artificial fog. Still, the gun survives. On June 13th, Manstein orders a general assault along key sectors. Infantry pushes deeper toward the city's interior defenses. Romanian units, bloodied earlier in the siege, now advance alongside German troops, supported by artillery fire that never fully stops. Sevastopol burns. Civilians shelter in tunnels and basements, surviving on dwindling rations. Fires rage unchecked in districts already reduced to rubble. The harbor is choked with sunken ships, scuttled to block capture, victims of air attack, or destroyed by long-range shelling. For the defenders, the psychological toll is as devastating as the physical one. The knowledge that somewhere beyond the hills, an enemy gun can reach almost any position creates a constant, gnawing fear. For the attackers, another realization sets in. The Schwerer Gustav has done its job. Its targets are running out. By June 15th, the gun fires its last operational shots of the campaign. The remaining Soviet positions are either too close to German lines or already collapsing under conventional fire. The giant falls silent. Its presence remains, looming and immobile, a reminder of what has already happened. As German infantry presses forward into the shattered outskirts of Sevastopol, the question is no longer whether the city will fall. It is how much of it will remain standing when it does. June 18, 1942. Southern Defensive Belt, Sevastopol. The fighting has moved underground. Lieutenant Hans Keller descends into a half-collapsed tunnel with a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The beam cuts through dust so thick it seems solid. The walls sweat moisture. Somewhere ahead, boots scrape on rock. These tunnels were once the pride of Sevastopol's defenses. Kilometers of galleries linking forts, ammunition stores, and command posts. Now they are traps. The Schwerer Gustav did not just destroy concrete. It crushed exits, buried air shafts, and turned carefully planned escape routes into dead ends. German pioneers advanced slowly, sealing tunnel mouths with explosives and flame. Soviet holdouts emerge coughing, blinded hands raised, or they fight to the end in pitch darkness. Above ground, the city is unrecognizable. German artillery pounds, remaining resistance day and night. Assault guns fire point-blank into buildings hollowed by weeks of bombardment. Stukas dive screaming into the harbor area, releasing bombs that send columns of water and fire skyward. On June 20th, General von Manstein issues orders for a final push. The inner defenses are collapsing. Ammunition is critically low on the Soviet side. Communications are fragmented. Black Sea Fleet evacuation attempts are sporadic and costly. General Petrov faces the impossible. He has delayed the Germans far longer than expected. He has inflicted heavy casualties. But the city cannot hold. That night, Soviet command authorizes evacuation of key personnel, by submarine and small craft. Thousands of wounded and civilians are left behind. Many defenders are never told the order has been given. They keep fighting. On June 23rd, German troops reach Sapun Ridge, the last major defensive high ground before the city center. From its crest, they can see the harbor, the ruined docks and ships burning at anchor. Behind them, far to the north, the Schwerer Gustav stands silent on its rails, already being dismantled. The gun will not fire again here. Its mission is complete. On June 30th, 1942, organized Soviet resistance in Sevastopol effectively ends. Pockets of fighting continue for days, even weeks, in caves and isolated tunnels. But the city, after 250 days of siege, has fallen. German flags rise over shattered fortifications. Prisoners stream into captivity, exhausted, starving, many barely able to walk. For Hauptmann Schultz, there is no triumph, only exhaustion. He watches rail crews begin the slow process of disassembling the giant gun, piece by piece, reversing the monumental effort that brought it here. The cost is visible everywhere. Sevastopol is a ruin. Tens of thousands are dead or wounded. Entire neighborhoods are erased. The Black Sea Fleet has lost its primary base. And the gun that helped break the city now sits inert, its value already under question. Manstein submits his report to Berlin. The victory is hailed. The Schwerer Gustav is praised as a technological marvel. But quietly, officers begin to ask uncomfortable questions. The gun required months of preparation, thousands of men, absolute air superiority, and a static enemy. It could not move quickly. It could not be concealed completely. It could not adapt. In a war that is becoming faster, more fluid, and more brutal by the month, such a weapon feels outdated. Still, for Sevastopol, none of that matters. The city has been broken by a machine built for a single purpose. And it worked. The rails are lifted. The site is erased. The hills grow quiet. But the scars, in stone, in earth, and in memory, will remain long after the gun itself is gone. July 3, 1942. Northern Crimea. Rail line assembly zone. The last section of barrel is lowered onto a reinforced flat car with a grinding shriek of metal. Chains snap tight. Orders are shouted, then repeated, then shouted again, not because they aren't heard, but because no one wants to be the man who makes a mistake now. Hauptmann Gerhard Schultz stands beside the tracks, clipboard forgotten at his side. Where the Schwerer Gustav once dominated the hills like a steel god, there is now only disturbed earth, crushed scrub, and the faint outline of parallel rails. The gun is leaving. Dismantling it takes almost as long as building it. Cranes reverse their choreography. Components are inspected for stress damage. Engineers argue quietly over hairline fractures in steel that was pushed to the very edge of possibility. Every piece is catalogued, wrapped, guarded. Around them, the war does not pause. Columns of German troops move south and east, chasing new objectives toward the Caucasus. Prisoners march the other direction, hollow-eyed, barefoot, silent. The ruins of Sevastopol smolder in the distance, smoke drifting lazily into the summer sky. The giant gun has already begun to fade into abstraction. Reports sent to Berlin describe its performance in precise terms. Targets destroyed, rounds fired, effectiveness confirmed. Propaganda photographs are staged. Headlines praise German engineering and willpower. The weapon becomes legend almost immediately. But among the men who served it, the memory is different. Schultz remembers the waiting, days spent doing nothing between firings, knowing that thousands of men depended on a single mechanism not failing. He remembers the way the ground jumped beneath his feet, the pressure in his chest, the sense that they were tampering with forces no human scale was meant to command. He also remembers how vulnerable they felt. Had the Soviets broken through even once? Had aircraft slipped past the fighters? Had a single shell jammed at the wrong moment? the Schwerer Gustav would have died where it stood. Elsewhere, officers in the German High Command begin to reassess. The gun cannot be rushed. It cannot respond to maneuver warfare. It demands dominance of air, rail, and terrain, luxuries the Wehrmacht will soon lack. By late 1942, the Eastern Front has changed. Stalingrad bleeds men and machines at a scale Sevastopol never approached. Mobility matters more than mass. Speed matters more than spectacle. The giant gun is moved again. And again. It fires sparingly. Sometimes not at all. Eventually, as Allied bombers range deeper into Germany and Soviet armies push westward, the calculus becomes unavoidable. The age of the supergun is over. In 1945, with defeat imminent, the Schwerer Gustav is destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture, blown apart in the Bavarian countryside. No enemy shell ever silences it. No opposing army ever overcomes it directly. It simply becomes irrelevant. Yet Sevastopol remains its testament. For a brief moment in 1942, one city stood against an empire, and an empire answered by building a machine so large it bent logistics, physics, and sanity around itself. It did not change the war, but it changed the city forever. And for those who stood beside it when it fired, when the earth shook, when the sky tore open, the memory never faded. The silence afterward was the loudest sound of all.